Hello? I hope everyone can hear me. Great. Okay, thank you very much. I believe we are now live based on the information from our technical team. We are now about to kick off this webinar, this virtual event. And yes, allow me to officially start as a moderator for the event today. This webinar. So we are here today basically on commemorating the 27th year of the genocide against the Tutsi, starting from the events in 1994. And this is part of events not only in Rwanda but across the world to commemorate the genocide against the Tutsi 27 years later. This event has been organized by the Embassy of the Republic of Rwanda based in the Netherlands. And we have speakers from different parts of the globe, including those that are here in Rwanda. My name is Ms Diane Mpyisi. I will be your moderator for today. I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. I am the host, I am the MD of Blue Oceans, which is a media and communication consultancy firm. Now, that said, I would like to just take everyone here through the program, just very briefly. We are going to kick off by hearing remarks by Honorable Ambassador Mr. Olivier JP Nduhungirehe, Ambassador of the Republic of Rwanda to the Kingdom of the Netherlands, followed by remarks from Mr. Serge Brammertz, who is here in his capacity as Chief Prosecutor at the International Residual Mechanism for Criminal Tribunals. That's the IRMCT. Following these remarks from our first two speakers, we will move on to presentations from three of our panelists here with us. These presentations, 20 minutes each from each panelist, who I will shortly introduce to you all. And then we will move on to an interactive discussion and then a Q&A session with people who will be filling in their questions, participants of this webinar, in the Q&A box, as you can see. Of course, this will now be followed by a final exchange from three of the panelists. And ladies and gentlemen, I just want to reinforce the concept that the reason we're having this webinar on the 27 years after the genocide against the Tutsi, how can we end genocide denial, is because genocide denial is real, it is happening, and is something that needs to be tackled. So the questions we're going to be asking ourselves and also listening to our speakers and panelists, addressing is to do with understanding what genocide denial is, what forms it takes, how can we understand it in the context of international freedoms and rights, and how can we, most importantly, effectively prevent genocide denial for present and future generations. We're also going to look at the accountability for the crime of genocide denial in itself to contribute against genocide denial. And of course, finally, given the steady rise, as we've been seeing, especially leading up to this year of genocide denial, Rwanda and other countries have adopted and enacting laws to criminalize the denial of genocide against the Tutsis. We are also going to ask the question, should other countries also adopt similar legislations? So I would like to just kick off now at this point by introducing our esteemed panelists. We have with us as subject matter experts who are going to address these questions that I've just outlined. And I would like to start with our first panelist, Dr. Roland Moerland. He is an assistant professor of criminology at the Maastricht University. He's a member of the International Association of Genocide Scholars, and he serves as an editor on the editorial board of the Genocide Studies and Prevention, an international journal. He's also the author of the book, The Killing of Death, Denying the Genocide Against the Tutsi. He specifically will address the topic of the concept of genocide denial. Dr. Roland Moerland, very happy to have you on this very important webinar on addressing genocide denial, 27 years against the genocide of the Tutsi. We also have with us as a panelist, Mr. Freddy Mutanguha. Mr. Freddy Mutanguha, seated right here, we are all together in Kigali, is here in his capacity as the Executive Director of Aegis Trust, Director of Aegis and the Director of the Kigali Genocide Memorial. Residual. He survived the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi as a teenager. As an orphan and a head of a household, Mr. Mutanguha worked his way through school to become one of the leading advocates for peace and human rights education. Mr. Mutanguha will talk about specifically commemoration, education, and public engagement, tools for the prevention of genocide denial, and pillars for unity and reconciliation. Mr. Freddy Mutanguha, great to have you on this important webinar. And last but not least, we are also joined by Ms Providence Umurungi, who's also here with us in the Kigali meeting. She's also here with us and here in her capacity as a principal state attorney at the Ministry of Justice in Rwanda, where she's the head of International Justice and Judicial Cooperation Department since 2016. Ms Umurungi, prior to her current position, was the associate legal officer at the UN International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda in Arusha, Tanzania, and an assistant lecturer at the law faculty at the University of Rwanda, where she taught human rights and international humanitarian law courses. Ms. Umurungi will talk to us about on the topic, the importance of accountability for genocide and its denial. So, Ms. Providence Umurungi, great to have you on this panel, participating in this webinar. So, without further ado, in the interest of also preserving the time allocated to us for this webinar, I would like to now hand over to Honorable Ambassador, Mr. Olivier Nduhungirehe, for his welcoming remarks. Over to you, Honorable Ambassador.
Thank you, Rita. Mr. Serge Brammertz, Chief Prosecutor of the International Residual Mechanism for Criminal Tribunals. Dr. Roland Moerland, Assistant Professor of Supranational Criminology at the Maastricht University. Mr. Freddy Mutanguha, Executive Director of Aegis Trust. Mrs. Providence Umurungi, Head of the International Justice and Judicial Cooperation Department in the Ministry of Justice of Rwanda. Excellencies, ambassadors, heads of mission and members of the diplomatic corps, dear compatriots, genocide survivors and members of the Rwandan community in the Netherlands, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm happy to welcome you all to this virtual conference on the theme 27 years after the genocide against the Tutsi, how can we end genocide denial? I'm particularly grateful to our speaker and to our three panelists for graciously accepting our invitation in order to share their knowledge and experience on this important topic of our time. Genocide denial is indeed the most serious challenge that Rwanda and the world are currently facing when it comes to our duty to commemorate and reflect on the 1994 genocide perpetrated against the Tutsi. 7 years ago, almost to the day, the United Nations Security Council adopted a landmark resolution, Resolution 2150, on the prevention and fight against genocide. Not only was this resolution adopted unanimously, but it had also been co-sponsored by all 15 members of the Security Council and became what it is called in the UN jargon a presidential text, which is very rare at the UN. This resolution, adopted on 16th April 2014 on the occasion of the 20th commemoration of the genocide against the Tutsi, called upon UN member states to recommit to prevent and fight against genocide, underscoring the importance of taking into account lessons learned from the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. Through that resolution, Security Council members, and I quote, condemned without reservation any denial of this genocide and urged member states to develop educational programs that will inculcate future generations with the lessons of the genocide in order to help prevent future genocides, end of quote. This was the first time that a UN resolution on Rwanda adopted the right terminology of genocide perpetrated against the Tutsi, as established by the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, ICTR. This was also the first time that a UN resolution clearly addressed the issue of genocide denial. I recall that before Resolution 2150 of 2014 political organs of the United Nations were using the general concept of Rwandan genocide or genocide in Rwanda, on which genocide perpetrators and their friends were building the genocide denial that was spread across the world. Years later, Resolution 2150 of the UN Security Council was confirmed by the UN General Assembly, first in a decision of 26 January 2018, and then in a resolution dated 20th April 2020, last year. The African Union, AU, also took an ambiguous stand against genocide denial. Its Peace and Security Council, the PSC, adopted a communique on 11th April 2017, in which it recalled, and I quote, the horror of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, and reiterated its commitment to prevent the recurrence of similar mass atrocities, hate crime, and ideologies of genocide throughout the African continent, end of quote. The Council went on to underline the importance of using a clear analysis and a proper terminology in order to avoid falling into the problem of deniers, and further condemned the denial and distortion of facts relating to the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. Unfortunately, despite the clear and constant pronouncement by the main international organizations on the legal qualification of genocide against the Tutsi, Rwanda is still facing persistent denial of its history by some world powers, permanent members of the UN Security Council. Unsurprisingly, those powers who today reject the jurisprudence of the ICTR and the resolutions of the UN they themselves adopted were the same who had refused to use the word genocide as it was happening
Hello. Unfortunately, there's been a connectivity issue, but I would like to now introduce the next speaker. We are yet to reconnect here in Kigali, but we should soon be online. And sincere apologies for this technical issue and inconvenience. I would like to introduce the next speaker, Mr. Serge Brammertz, who's the Chief Prosecutor at the International Residual Mechanism for Criminal Tribunals. Mr. Serge, the floor is yours.
Results are so horrific that they cannot be fully described. The death of so many innocent victims whose bodies continue to be recovered today. Families destroyed or ripped apart, leaving a generation of children without parents, an entire country deeply traumatized. The appeal chamber of the Rwanda Tribunal concluded that the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi is a fact of common knowledge. In legal terms, this means that it cannot be disputed. So what remains to us is to defend and promote this truth against genocide denial by some. We will discuss today how we end genocide denial, and I'm looking forward to hearing the contributions of all our distinguished participants. From my side, as an international prosecutor, I would like just to make 3 points. First, to fight genocide denial, we must continue the fight for justice. Every prosecution of an alleged genocidaire is a rejection of denial and a
Mr. Prosecutor, you are on mute, I think.
Have I been unmute all the time, or only?
No. Just the last sentence.
Okay, sorry, I don't know what happened. So as I said, my office is currently prosecuting Felicien Kabuga and seeking to arrest 6 other fugitives, including Potais Imperania. My colleague, the Prosecutor General of Rwanda, and his team are seeking another 1,000 fugitives. Similarly, my office is standing against genocide denial by prosecuting serious contempt of court allegations in the Turinabo et al. Case. So by supporting this investigative and judicial work, all of us can make important contributions to the fight against genocide denial. For example, in my last report to the United Nations Security Council, I denounced the lack of cooperation being provided by a number of countries. Public pressure on these countries is important to improve the situation and ensure fugitives are brought to justice. My second point, obvious, is education. Education is obviously critical. What has been established in the courtroom must be taught in the classroom. And not just in history classes. Education about the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi is about much more. It's about ethics and morality. It's about law and human rights. It's about civics and the responsibilities of citizenship. And it is, of course, about the dangers that we must resist: hate, discrimination, and genocide ideology. And finally, it was already mentioned, there is a need for laws criminalizing genocide denial. Wherever genocide has been committed, genocide denial is present. This seems in a way a universal fact. Whether we speak of Rwanda, the Holocaust, or the Srebrenica genocide. It also seems that no amount of facts, education, memorials, or social pressure will stop genocide denial. Of course, we can all do more to spread the truth, but can we really conclude that this is where the problem lies? Wherever there is genocide denial, there will be those who seek to exploit it to gain influence, power, or advantage. So it is not just a matter of a few misguided individuals. Genocide denial is being and will be used as a tool for political and other purposes. So the conclusion is that, unfortunately, with the tools we have currently, the fight against genocide has not yet been fully successful. This is definitely not a situation we can accept, because genocide denial causes the victims and survivors of genocide immense pain. If criminal sanction is the only way to bring this pain to an end, to preserve the memory of the victims, and to prevent genocide ideology from again unleashing its horrors, then making genocide denial a crime everywhere is the responsible choice. I thank you again very much for inviting me to this very interesting conference. I'm looking forward to the different discussions, and we all know that today is a very important event, but fighting genocide denial, we all need to do it every day in our professional and personal lives. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to our discussions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brammertz, and absolutely you're right when you say that the fight against genocide denial is something to do every day in our capacity, because this is something that keeps on happening. Thank you very much for your remarks, Mr. Brammertz. I'd like us to now move on to the panel discussion with our panelists. Like I said earlier on, our presentations are going to be from Dr. Roland Moerland, from Mr. Freddy Mutanguha, and from Ms Providence Umurungi. So the first person to give the presentation is going to be from Dr. Moerland, and I would like us to just very quickly just give a chance to Dr. Moerland to present his remarks. And I would just like to start by opening up to you, Dr. Moerland, in terms of just a general question. You wrote a book, like I said earlier on, entitled The Killing of Death, Denying the Genocide Against the Tutsi. You know, you're very qualified to discuss this particular panel with regards to the concept of genocide denial. You have 20 minutes. Over to you, Dr. Moerland.
Thank you. Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of the webinar for the invitation to participate. I'm very honored to be able to contribute to this event that marks the commemoration of the genocide against the Tutsi. Although a genocide is a unique historical event, comparative research shows that such episodes of mass violence share certain characteristics. One significant communal feature of all genocides, and it was already mentioned by the previous speaker, whether we are talking about the Holocaust, the Armenian genocide, or the Srebrenica genocide, or the genocide against the Tutsi, what they all have in common is that the genocidal violence is denied. This, of course, raises the question why denial is so intrinsic to the process of genocide. I want to start my presentation by paying attention to this question, and I will clarify how denial is related to the perpetration of that crime. After this more general introduction of the phenomenon of genocide denial, I want to use the remainder of my presentation to focus on the denial of the genocide against the Tutsi. More particularly, I want to address several contemporary challenges that the denial poses, because such challenges have implications for how we are to address the problem of genocide denial. For perpetrators, denial serves multiple purposes related to the initiation, continuation, but also the finalization and the consolidation of genocide. To overcome psychological and normative barriers to violent behavior, perpetrators deny the humanity of their victims, thereby neutralizing the inhibitions against violence, enabling them to victimize other human beings. Denial also enables perpetrators to cope with the negative personal and social repercussions of their criminal behavior, which, if done successfully, facilitates the continuation and normalization of violence. In addition to enabling the initial perpetration of acts of genocide and the subsequent reperpetration, denial is also explicitly recognized by scholars as the primary mechanism operating during the last stage of genocide. Genocide entails a double victimization. First, a people are exterminated, followed by the destruction of the memory of that violence. That last action is performed by denial. That denial is intrinsic to genocide can be explained with reference to its aim, that according to Raphael Lemkin, the originator of the concept of genocide, is annihilation. Annihilation requires that in addition to the victims, the manifestations or remnants of the violence that was perpetrated are also destroyed so that nothing reminds us of the victims and the process by which they were victimized. Genocide, in the end, thus unleashes its violence upon itself in order to obliterate its reality. As Mark Nishanian explained, due to the nature of the crime, genocide is destined to erase itself as an historical fact. Such erasure can take the form of the physical destruction of evidence, but due to the massive scope of the crime, it is impossible to destroy all evidence and to dispose of all the witnesses. To deal with such evidentiary challenges, perpetrators resort to discursive means of destruction, or as Nishanian refers to it, denialist historiographic perversion. They use words to kill history. It is important to highlight, as Douglas did, that genocide denial is an invention of the perpetrators themselves, and not of post-war genocide ideologues or racists. According to Douglas, denial must be understood not simply as an attempt to paper over atrocities post hoc, rather it is an act that is fully consonant with the original methods of the perpetrators. Denial is a means of performing genocide. Smith, Marcuson, and Lifton conclude that due to its intrinsic role in the process of perpetration, denial ought to be seen as a contribution to the genocidal violence in its own right. Denial therefore constitutes a direct existential threat to the victims. It kills truth, makes history unintelligible, thereby finalizing the process of genocidal annihilation, while those who suffer are denied their statuses of victims. The profound implication is that as long as there is denial, the genocidal process continues, and denial thus causes a dynamic of continued victimization. This makes genocide denial a pressing contemporary issue, because like under other stages in the genocidal process, like persecution or extermination that happened in the past, denial of genocide is a present manifestation of the genocidal violence. If we do not recognize that denial is an essential part of genocide, we fail to comprehend a major component of the dynamics of extermination. The fact that denial is a present manifestation of genocidal violence means that it requires our immediate attention and resolve. However, several developments make dealing with genocide denial a challenge. I would like to use the remainder of my presentation to reflect on some of those challenges that are particularly relevant with regard to the genocide against the Tutsi. However, before I address these challenges more in depth, I first want to mention two cases that received already quite some attention. The first case concerns the BBC documentary Rwanda's Untold Story. The second case concerns Judy Reeves' book In Praise of Blood. Maybe you've heard of those cases or publications. The documentary and the book were presented as insightful exposés that challenged the accepted story regarding the events in Rwanda. However, upon their release, they were met with severe criticism. And for instance, Ibuka, the organization representing victims of the genocide against the Tutsi, denounced the documentary and the book as negationist. The documentary and the book questioned the nature, direction, and scope of the genocidal violence that took place in Rwanda in 1994. Their controversial claims, however, remain uncorroborated by undisputed scientific research. And the claims do not find support in the overwhelming amount of evidence that has been gathered on the events that took place in 1994. Both the documentary and the book have serious denialist implications. I mention these two cases because for me they highlight several of the challenges that we are confronted with when trying to address the problem of denial. The first challenge concerns the increasing sophistication of the denial of the genocide against the Tutsi. The documentary and the book are exemplary for how the denial of the genocide against the Tutsi has developed over time, where initial denials simply factually denied that a genocide had been perpetrated. Over time, more complex forms of denial were developed to obscure the true nature of the violence that took place. Instead of factual denials, such sophisticated denials entail forms of interpretative and implicatory denial. In cases of straightforward literal denial, the facts are negated. No genocide took place. What you say did not happen. You are lying. However, when evidence regarding the genocide against the Tutsi started to accumulate, such denials could easily be recognized as lies. Faced with the mounting evidence of the crimes, deniers switched their approach and no longer simply negated the facts. Instead, they presented convincing reinterpretations of the events. They acknowledged that indeed something happened, but the meaning of the events were reinterpreted, thereby altering the historical reality. What happened is not what you think what happened. It is not genocide, but it's civil war. And this war ultimately triggered spontaneous interethnic violence. However, as it became clear beyond dispute that what happened in Rwanda amounted to genocide, these reinterpretations also became less convincing. And in turn, deniers started to rely on so-called implicatory denials. In such cases, the events and their meaning are acknowledged, but the moral and legal consequences violence. Yes, we targeted a group of people. It could even be called genocide, but we acted out of legitimate self-defense. So what we did was not wrong, and we were provoked in using the violence against that group. To make audiences receptive to such denials, deniers often argue that they are presenting the other side to a misunderstood story. By doing so, they attempt to create legitimate space for their denialist accounts. They convey that because the situation is misunderstood, a debate is still legitimate and necessary to get to the real truth. This strategy raises doubt about the existing knowledge on the genocide. It is suggested that what we know might be not true or untrue, which makes audiences more open to such narratives. What makes their argument even more credible to audiences is that the authors of the documentary and the book also claim to acknowledge the genocide against the Tutsi. They claim to acknowledge all the violence perpetrated at both sides. Such explicit acknowledgement of the genocide, however, become meaningless disclaimers if the subsequent analysis structurally insinuates that the Tutsi were to blame themselves for the genocidal violence that was inflicted upon them, and that they have also perpetrated crimes of the same magnitude. One important development that I furthermore witnessed is that initially denial was often couched or framed in the political rhetoric of the perpetrators and those who ideologically align with them. But the documentary and the book are not such political pamphlets. Instead, they present denial in an appealing narrative form. From the field of narrative analysis, we know that narratives have certain characteristics. They have a plot, they have a set of characters, there is a moral to the story. All these elements make them very appealing to broader audiences, and the narrative form plays an important role in how such questionable historical narratives become mainstream and those more generally accepted by audiences. The second challenge concerns a proliferation of the means of denial and the actors involved. What we have seen over the last decades is that the group of actors involved in the denial of the genocide against the Tutsi has extended in scope. As Finkielkraut indicated, those who are involved in the process of extermination and those who deny genocide are not always the same people. According to Finkielkraut, negation cannot be put down to the evil that it strives to excuse. Its discourse exceeds the bounds of ideology to which it is described, and its followers do not fit the image that the general public has of them. So, we are confronted with a wide variety of actors involved in genocide denialism, and those involved in the denial of the genocide against the Tutsi has broadened from the initial perpetrators and their coterie to other actors including lawyers, scholars, journalists, NGOs, etc. Interestingly, many of these actors were originally not implicated in the genocide. What brings these actors together in processes of denial is not that they necessarily aim to achieve the same goal as the perpetrators, but somehow their ideas and beliefs overlap and they start to inhabit the same discursive universes. Those who engage in denial are often not your usual suspects, and therefore harder to recognize for audiences. Beyond this proliferation of actors, we also see an increase in the opportunities to spread questionable denialist rhetoric. Modern social media play an important role in this process, as they allow actors via relatively cheap and simple means to reach broad international audiences. In filter bubbles and echo chambers, on fora, chats and Facebook, the denial dynamic is subsequently reinforced because users encounter only information and opinions that confirm to and reinforce their beliefs. What I find particularly striking about the documentary and the book that I referred to earlier is that in the past, such documentaries or books with such extreme claims had to be aired and shared via obscure online platforms or exotic publishers. It is therefore telling that the documentary and the book were released by the BBC and Penguin Random House Press, which are major and renowned media outlets reaching a global audience and whose authority lends credibility to these highly questionable narratives. The involvement of such media outlets illustrates how the scope of actors widens. I don't think that these organizations intended to deny the genocide, but nonetheless, their actions facilitate the process of genocide denial in an important way. Despite the fact that the seriousness of the problem increases, we see a lack of a coherent effort to curb the problem, and that is the third challenge. How serious genocide denial is taken and which genocides are addressed in education or, for instance, legislation depends on situational factors regarding the role genocide played and still plays in a society. As Deborah Lipstadt noted, the swastika or the denial of the Holocaust has a different resonance in Atlanta than it does in Berlin or Vienna. However, if you acknowledge genocide denial's intrinsic potential to do violence, limitations remain very hard to justify, because in that case, all denial is harmful, no matter when, where, and regarding what genocide. Moreover, as I already said, in our globalized world, denial doesn't stop at regional or state borders. Due to the internet and new social media, deniers reach international audiences, and these developments turn genocide denial into a collective problem that is not limited to certain states or regions where a certain genocide has been perpetrated. Lastly, and very importantly, we should not forget that genocides result in diaspora communities across the globe. Many Tutsi, for instance, fled the genocidal violence in Rwanda in 1994 and ended up in Europe. But in many countries, denying the genocide against the Tutsi is not criminalized, nor does it otherwise receive much educational attention. This lack of a coherent effort or harmonized approach greatly affects the opportunity structure of genocide denial, and it provides ample possibility to deny the genocide against the Tutsi without any repercussions. The fourth and last challenge that I want to address relates to how to deal with this problem that we are facing, how to raise awareness among vulnerable audiences, and how to hold accountable those who engage in denial or facilitate it. Scientific research forms the basis of strategies that focus on critical awareness and criminal accountability. You need a thorough understanding of the problem, its operation, and the harm that it causes in order to raise awareness or to hold actors accountable. The problem is, however, that, for instance, I, as a scholar, run into the limitations of the current field of research. Most research focuses on the denial of the Holocaust or the Armenian genocide, and in comparison, there is not much in-depth research on the denial of the genocide against the Tutsi. Moreover, the pioneering spirit of the 1990s, in which research on genocide denial boomed, seems to have mostly stalled, and innovative work on especially the denial of the genocide against the Tutsi is currently lacking. To address the just mentioned challenges, the field of research needs to overcome its limitations, it needs to reinvigorate itself, and it needs to develop further. But even if you develop a thorough scientific basis, raising awareness and creating accountability comes with its own specific challenges. A problem with criminal accountability is that it probably does not lead to a change in belief of the accused. The coercive nature of criminal justice can create backlash because prosecution can turn deniers into martyrs, while also providing them a platform. Instead of uprooting their denial, chances are that they see themselves affirmed in their beliefs. In addition, criminalization can have a chilling effect on how people express themselves. Furthermore, even when legislation is very precise, having it encompass all possible forms of denial will be an immense challenge given the dynamic nature of the phenomenon. Despite these downsides, criminalization of genocide denial can be a very powerful symbolic acknowledgement. It confirms historical facts as common knowledge, and it is an authoritative way to communicate that certain behavior is not tolerated. And it is a way to protect the victims and to show our solidarity with them. However, criminalization does not make vulnerable audiences more able-bodied against denial, nor does it address all behavior that is relevant in terms of genocide denialism. Denial dynamics not only rely on hardcore denial of perpetrators or those who ideologically align with them, denial is also enabled and facilitated by people's ignorance, indifference, lack of understanding, and their erosion of memory. These mechanisms cause lacuna in our knowledge and awareness. In that case, policies should focus on gathering historical knowledge and its public acknowledgement. But collecting and studying the facts is not enough. To combat denial, a critical understanding of denial and its role in genocide is required so that audiences can recognize the often complex denial rhetoric for what it really is. However, as explained before, the denial of the genocide against the Tutsi has become so insidiously complex, which makes it very difficult for audiences to discern denialist from non-denialist content. For non-experts, this is a daunting and sometimes impossible task. The challenge is therefore how to raise critical awareness in a comprehensive and understandable way about this complex issue among non-expert audiences. Let me conclude. We tend to think that genocides, because of their enormous scope and magnitude, are not vulnerable to historiographic perversion or denial. They are such massive historical events. How can they even be denied? That question I am asked often when I talk about my research. But histories of genocide are vulnerable because denial is intrinsic to the perpetration of the crime, as I explained in the beginning. Now, 27 years later, and given the challenges that I described earlier, maybe the history of the genocide against the Tutsi is more vulnerable than ever. Reever's book and the BBC documentary are not incidents. They are part of a steady stream of denialist content captured in tracts, reports, books, videos, etc. The denial of the genocide against the Tutsi is proliferating, involving a wider range of forms, but also a wider range of actors, and it is becoming more mainstream, reaching broader audiences. This development is, however, not mirrored in a more forceful and coherent effort to deal with the problem. The denial of the genocide requires our serious and continued attention. In 1994, most people and institutions around the world were bystanders to the genocide that took place. Today, we should be very careful not to become bystanders to genocide denial. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Moerland. That was a very insightful presentation and very sobering words, actually. You know, when you said that genocide denial is an existential threat to victims and survivors, and most importantly, genocide denial is an act of genocide itself. And like, you know, many organizations are doing to commemorate the 27th year of the genocide against the Tutsi. We are understanding, like you said, that this denial is getting more proliferated. It is being engaged on mainstream media, and now more than ever, I think, like you said, rightly so, Dr. Moerland, we really need to dig in our heels and collaboratively and collectively, you know, work together to fight this. Thank you very much. We'll engage with you later on, just picking on your presentation. I'd like to now give the floor to Mr. Freddy Mutanguha. Mr. Freddy Mutanguha is here in his capacity, like I said before, as the Director of Executive Director, of Aegis Trust, and with this title also serves as the Director of the Kigali Genocide Memorial. So Mr. Freddy Mutanguha, if you could just share with us how commemoration, education, and public engagement can be effective tools for genocide denial, as well as serving for pillars of unity and reconciliation. You have 20 minutes, and I'd like to kindly ask you to be conscious of the time given. Thank you. Over to you, Freddy.
Thank you very much, Moderator. And echoing what Roland said, say thank you to the organizers of this conference and giving me this opportunity to be part of it and do my moderate contribution, focusing on commemoration, education, and public engagement as the key tools for prevention of denial, and also the pillars and the key pillars for reconciliation and forgiveness in Rwanda and elsewhere. So, the commemoration, let me start with the commemoration. The commemoration is a tool to prevent denial. Why? Because the denial is against the truth, and the commemoration faces the truth. And the commemoration promotes the historical clarity, which challenges the deniers and also the ideas that lead to denial of genocide. But also, of course, it promotes the forgiveness and the reconciliation. Why do we commemorate? We do commemorate because we want to show respect to the victims of genocide, but also we want to promote the memory of our loved ones for current generation and also for the future generation. The commemoration is an important, and it's an opportunity to reflect about our past. It's an important element to look back and see how the Rwandan values used to be before colonial time, and see how when the ideology of genocide was implanted in my country, the time of the colonial time, and how it destroyed the social fabric of Rwandans. And through commemoration, we also look at how the ideology and the hate have evolved, and how the dehumanization and division and discrimination have evolved up to the point it reached the final solution in 1994, where 1 million of Tutsi have been killed, the innocent people, men, women, and children. So through commemoration, it's an important element to understand the genesis of ideology of genocide, who have been involved, why it happened. And it's very, very important that we understand how the ideology of genocide was taught at the point where innocent people, who born innocent, people who live side by side with their neighbors in harmony, can walk in the morning and become a mass murderer. And it's very hard to understand, but through commemoration, we get to understand this phenomenon. So the commemoration is very also important, because we draw lessons from our past through commemoration, but also it's very important to grow our humanity and promote living together. I may say that also the commemoration is also very, very important in supporting the healing of survivors, but also in healing the country itself. The commemoration is done in many ways. Our side, it can be done through a monument. The commemoration is also done through events, such as the event we have on the 7th of April when the commemoration period started. The commemoration also is done through memorials, and I will focus on the Kigali Genocide Memorial where I work, and talk more about it and what actually the memorial, Kigali Genocide Memorial, have for us. The Kigali Genocide Memorial, it's a place of remembrance, and it's a place where survivors come and pay respect, and also the visitors, the Rwandans and international visitors come and pay respect of genocide. But also it's a place where the collection of testimonies of survivors are collected, and through collection of testimonies, the memorial contribute to the mission of commemoration by promoting the truth. And the memorial also do production of films and documentaries, gathering test-based materials, and keep the artifact of genocide, all this to show what happened and how our past, actually how the hate and division and genocide have happened in my country. Other testimonies also are collected, such as the testimonies of rescuers. In Kinyarwanda we call abarinzi b'igihango. Also testimonies of RPA soldiers in Hotanyi. Those tools actually to show the world that Rwanda during 1994 genocide, actually the hope and the frame of hope didn't turn off completely, but there's some people who took courage to fight against the evil of genocide, and be courage enough to save the lives of Tutsi and people who survive today. We all say thank you to those people and their courage. We also collect testimonies from perpetrators, and this is very, very important as a tool to fight against the denial, because the people themselves who committed genocide, who perpetrated genocide, who killed people during genocide, they give testimony on how they did it. But also, it's an opportunity, of course, to hear from them how they changed, actually, their behaviors to become from the innocent people to become perpetrators. And it's a huge lesson, of course, for the young generation and today's generation to learn from them, to not take actually the route they take in their lives to prevent these crimes as soon as possible so that it doesn't happen again. So the memorial, it's also a place of education. You were talking about how education actually is very important and a tool for genocide denial prevention. It's a place of education, but we need to discuss to understand what kind of education that this memorial and the whole, of course, commemoration provide to prevent denials of genocide. Of course, we know that education is very, very important, and education can change the world. But we need also to be careful because the education can be used on the opposite side and on opposite way. So, as I mentioned, the education is very important, but as you know, the education in Rwanda, the young people, I was there and I witnessed that one. The young people in my country, before 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, the young people were taught to hate. They were taught to discriminate. They were taught about division, how the Tutsi dehumanized. And this ideology that's really against the Tutsi have been evolved into education system, into all life of the country, up to the point everyone, I mean the millions of perpetrators actually was created in my country. So what kind of education we need really to prevent denial of genocide in my country? So we need an education that influences young people to resist the manipulation of deniers. This is very, very important. And we need education that promotes positive values, cohabitation, and reconciliation. We need an education that really develops the skills of critical thinking so that young people can question, can put the question of the deniers of actually deniers ideas, because if they're able to question the messages they get from deniers, they will be able to prevent it. But also, we need education that promotes the empathy, so that you, instead of hating your neighbor, you are the one to actually promote the cohabitation with your neighbor and feel the pain of your neighbor, such as this time of commemoration, where the survivors of genocide, they need people, they need their neighbors to be together with them instead of pushing them away. So we need an education that promotes the personal responsibility for young people and adult people who are able to be responsible for their actions, who are able to understand how to make the right actions and right decision in the right time. The good news is that after 27 years, the leadership of Rwanda understood what is needed in terms of education, because, of course, the experience we went through, it was a lesson for Rwandans and for all of us. And today, the Rwanda Education Board managed to incorporate genocide education together with the peace and the value education into the national curriculum, which is very, very important. And as a result, the young people get out of school with these skills of independent thinking, empathy. People are capable to challenge the ideology of genocide or are able to promote the positive values. And this is very, very important, because this is actually what will help us to have an education that's really promote the peace in my country and combat the ideology of genocide. So today, the education that was incorporated into the national curriculum is taught in all levels, pre-primary, primary, secondary level, and it's done through the learner-centered and the methodology that really encourage the participation, which the young people are able to share the stories. Because in education, we know that people get education, the students get education from their homes, their schools, and many other places. But by sharing and having this participatory methodology, the students are able to share their own stories, and the students are able to learn from each other. So apart from education system, this education that promotes peace, reconciliation, and forgiveness have been part of the many sectors in my country, especially through the Unity and Reconciliation Commission, and also the private and NGOs working with the government of Rwanda. We all are committed to promote this education that challenges the denial of genocide. So all this need to be helped by the public engagement, as you mentioned, which is a very, very important tool to prevent the denial of genocide. It's very, very important that, as Dr. Roland was talking about, actually it's very important to raise the capacity of research community in my country to build up the evidence of genocide, and everything that was happening here in my country to come actually available for the public. And this actually will help to build up the policies that's really based on really important evidence that came up from the research community in my country. The research is very important, but also we need to engage people in more and more, like in conferences like this one, because people get to learn really a lot from this engagement. I know the COVID-19 doesn't allow people, it actually make it even difficult to get people meet face to face, but we find more ways to hold this conference online. But when it comes to the post-COVID time, and when we resume the conference on face-to-face, it will be very important also to continue to be together, to reflect together, and also to share the ideas and experiences together so that we can learn from each other. So today, we are in the world of technology, and it's very, very important that the social media is used mainly to put in message that's really comfort people, but at the same time the message that really challenge the ideology of genocide. We need to reach out to young people, and the research this time have shown that 91% of a group age between 16 to 24 years old, they are on technology. Actually, they use phones, they use social networking, and they use internet. And this is really the right channel to reach out the young people, so which is very, very important. Of course, even the group age of 25 to 40, actually, they they use phones, social networking at 89%, which is very, very important to reach those people. So the social media using different social media is very, very important to reach out the mass of people. And then I would like to end up saying that I would like to support the survivors who remember their beloved ones. And this time of commemoration is not easy period of time, but we all together. And thank you very much for listening. And if there are any questions, please, you're welcome to ask, and then I'll be there for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Freddy. Absolutely, this is a very difficult time. You know, I'm sure every day for survivors is not easy, but it's especially hard during the commemoration period. Freddy, I think it's also very important, like you said, to really, one of the things in challenging or combating genocide denial is to also build local resources, research capacity locally in Rwanda, because I think if we don't have as much, you know, capacity at home, then, you know, we're not on the same level playing field when we're trying to challenge genocide denial. So absolutely, Freddy, that's something I agree with, and I know we will return to this later during the discussion between participants, as well as the discussion between panelists in the final exchange. I would like to now hand over to Ms Providence Umurungi. Like I said earlier on, she's here in her capacity as the head of International Justice and Judicial Cooperation Department at the Ministry of Justice, Rwanda, and her presentation will focus on the importance of accountability for genocide and its denial. Over to you, Providence, in the next, and if you could give your presentation within the time frame of 20 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. I'll start, first of all, by thanking the organizers who invited me to be part of this important conference. Yes, after what Professor Roland said about the context and what surrounding the denial of a genocide, the issue of accountability matters a lot. Before talking about the accountability within its denial, let's talk about first even the accountability for genocide itself. As he said, and as many scholars have shown, the crime of genocide itself is interlinked with its denial, because those who commit the genocide, when they were planning it, of course they have also to plan how to deny that that crime didn't take place. So accountability matters not only for peace, but most importantly it was for Rwanda case to restore dignity for victims, to serve justice and know the truth, what happened really, and also to ensure deterrence. The issue of ensuring deterrence was very important, but because the 1994 genocide against Tutsi, it was not an accident. It was a culmination of many acts since 1994, but because of the politics of the previous government, the issue of
Providence, we can't hear. We can't hear.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, yes. Sorry, my apology. I think, okay. Let me maybe again start quickly. I was saying that the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi happened 49 years after the Holocaust, 46 years after the adoption of the 1948 UN Convention on Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. So 27 years later today, though there are so many concerted efforts that were we can notice at national and international levels to prosecute the perpetrators of a genocide against the Tutsi, as it has been highlighted by my colleague and the panelist who talked about the genocide denier in the first place, Mr. Roland. It seems that now we are in face of a war against the genocide denier, which shows itself as a lifelong struggle. So my presentation was starting to talk about the context of 94, just after the 94 genocide committed against Tutsi, how the country, the system itself was completely destroyed, to hold accountable the perpetrators, and also the different steps that the country took to address the issue of accountability and end with the culture of impunity, which has characterized before all the politics of before 1994. As I was saying, after 94, we didn't have, not only within our system, our penal code, there was no crime of a genocide, though Rwanda has ratified the UN Convention of 1948. We didn't have it in our criminal code. So the first issue was to put in place laws and also build systems, the judicial reforms, which can respond to that issue, that paramount really context at that time. So on one side, you have thousands of suspects who have participated in the genocide. On the other side, you have thousands and thousands of victims who are claiming justice, and you are in the face of the system which is not in place. So you have to restart like the engine, put in place laws, put in place the judicial reforms, educate, have judges, lawyers, but it took like 2 years. The first law on punishment of crime and genocide was adopted in August 1996, which also but incorporated the definition of genocide crime. And the first cases started actually December 1996. At the same time, the UN Tribunal, the Security Council has already put in place the ad hoc International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, ICTR, which had the seat in Arusha. So those two institutions, our national courts and ICTR on the other side, coexisted to address the issue of accountability of those who committed the genocide in Rwanda. So many states, I would just as the issue of the accountability, the importance, the good things that many states are state party to the UN Convention of 1948, and that convention itself give the duty to prosecute genocide within either those state parties or to extradite those who committed the genocide. So the obligation to prosecute derives from that convention. So far, before talking about the denier itself, so far we have, as Excellence Ambassador, I think he talked about it, we have the government of Rwanda has sent already in different countries the indictment, more than 100 indictment. But unfortunately, yes, there are some states which took really steps, they judged or they transferred, extradited those people to Rwanda, but the number are still few. So far we have about 1,146 indictments, and above which only 46 cases, I can say, 23 took place in foreign jurisdiction, and also 23 were sent to Rwanda. Among them, there are 3 cases that were transferred by the ICTR. But this shows at least that the issue of accountability, even if the crime of genocide took place in Rwanda, states which are beyond the competence, the judicial to judge the crime of genocide is an international recognized one. So even other states took that decision to try the perpetrators who committed genocide before leaving Rwanda. But still, we still have the challenge of having those many others, and some countries that accept to be like a safe haven for those people. We continue to work on cooperation with those countries with hope that they will arrest those people and either they try them or they send them to Rwanda. So what about then the importance to as I said, the genocide itself and its denial, they are linked. So I will not talk about, I was preparing my presentation to talk about the ICTR, but the prosecutor, Chief Prosecutor Serge talked about it. In general, the legacy of the tribunal itself, international recognition that the fact that the UN Security Council accepted to put in place such kind of tribunal itself is a recognition that the genocide against Tutsi was committed in Rwanda. This was reinforced by the judicial notice in the Karemera case, which came to emphasize, to say that the genocide, the commission of a genocide against Tutsi, which was committed in 1994, is a fact of common knowledge. So there is no other discussion about that. This is a landmark which we take note and which also help in fighting those who deny genocide, because the first argument is to say it didn't happen. While we have not only the recognition of the International Tribunal, but also it was also recognized by the 2 resolutions that His Excellency Ambassador talked about it, of the resolution of the UN Security Council 2150 of 2014, and the recent one of last year, January 2018. The fact that we have internationally those instruments, those positions, put us in a strong position to continue fighting the genocide. Of course, perpetrators will continue, their supporters will continue to deny it. As Mr. Roland said, now the big challenge that we could expect that perpetrators will continue. But now is that the deniers are no longer only the perpetrators, but also it's taking another step. We are now facing as the 2 that he mentioned, the BBC and those who pretend to say they are scholars, they are journalist investigators like Judy River, as he said, and who have that platform, big platforms, they have that audience, the big audiences. So it's an issue that we have to, all of us, it's not a responsibility of Rwanda only. The crime of genocide is a crime against all humankind. I think this struggle, this war should be a collective one. And as you know, genocide denial is the last stage of the crime of genocide itself. So it's something that we have to expect, but also we have to fight with all our means possible. So what did if we can compare what has been done, this, because it's it's new, if we compare for the 27 years now, but if you compare with the Holocaust, even now, I know there's still some, deniers, and so for us it's still fresh, but I think we can always use, or by extension, for those countries that have laws that punish the Holocaust denier, why not to extend their laws to genocide against the Tutsi? We have some countries that have already enacted the laws. In Rwanda, we have our own law on genocide, fighting genocide ideology and genocide denial. France has done also have revised its law after some conflict with the community of Rwandans living in France, when some journalists or media used the genocide as a tool, like, for humoristic, and I think you remember even in now, I think there is a case against one of the chronicles in France, but at least they adopted and they changed their laws, which include the genocide against the Tutsi, though they didn't mention against the genocide against the Tutsi, but the way the law they revised it, it's just that whoever will deny or try to use the genocide that have been recognized by international court and even national court will be punished for genocide denial, and there are punishment and fines that are provided in their laws. We have some cases in the USA, in Canada, on Holocaust denial. In the US, I was reading one case that was very interesting, where we know that the challenge is always to balance between the freedom of speech, because they have laws protecting freedom of speech and freedom of expression, and also genocide denial. Where is the limit? But the good thing is that even in those countries, they recognize that the freedom of speech is not an absolute one. There must be some restrictions. So in U.S. case, to regulate the freedom of speech, not by the content or certain expression, but they said to regulate based on the danger that the certain expression can pose to the society. Of course, those who deny, those who try to rewrite our history, there are some expressions that really are hurting, and we have to protect our society, mostly the victims of the genocide against the Tutsi. We have cases in Canada where some people, there's a notorious case of Zunda, who was found guilty of under Canadian Human Rights Act for using the telecommunication devices. He was disputing hateful messages against the minorities. So that one was also deported to Germany after the case. So we think that some countries that are taking positive steps to enact laws, to take decisions that are going in that sense, we call upon other countries to adopt the same attitude, not only to host genocide perpetrators, but also to fight those who continue to rewrite the history and be part of this long league they have now of genocide denial. I was talking about France, the revision of the Gayson Act on freedom of speech, which the Article 173, which modified the Article 24, said that the law on freedom of speech, there are those punishment of 1 year of imprisonment and 45,000 euros of fines for the person who deny, who try to trivialize or banalize every genocide that have been punished and recognized by either the French court or international court, which means that this also includes the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. Challenges have been raised by Roland in general, but legally speaking, they are the same challenges. The first of all is that we are also assisting, as it was said, an increase of social media platforms, which now became like a new ground of the Commission of Genocide Denial, and they are spreading it easily. But we have to know that the genocide denial hampers the fight against impunity itself for the genocide and other associated crimes. So
and this, if they continue to vehicle such kind of messages, it may be a really a problem for eventual reconciliation and the healing process that is in place in Rwanda. The genocide denier not only humanize as a genocide itself, the crime, the survivors and the victims, but also it reaps them the recognition and the justice that has been already done for them. So we are facing also lack of a political will of some states which host a genocide suspect. I can't just pass behind that, who are refusing either to cooperate to send them. As I said, we have sent almost more than 1,100 indictments. But so far, as I said, it's only 23 cases that have been sent to Rwanda. I know, and all of you, you know how having just even one case in Europe or in America can be costly, and just to bring their victims, witnesses, we have noticed that. But if it's expensive, so why not they can't extradite and send them to Rwanda? Why? Because the convention give them both possibilities. Either you try or you extradite. So, and I think the extradition would be the easiest way to send those people. And so in Rwanda, we are ready. We have laws. We have a judicial system which is strong and independent. So we hope that maybe with the future, as I said, it's a continuous struggle. It's not something that we say we can succeed within one day or within 1 year. So we think that it's time that countries that after 27 years now, it will be better that some countries take really serious steps and send those perpetrators to Rwanda so they can stand for trial. Way forward, of course, as I said, it's if countries can enact laws at national level which criminalize the denial of genocide, that will be helpful. Passing those laws will be then help in prosecution of those deniers. Also, there should be, we need to be clear, knowing that even themselves, though they have the laws on freedom of speech, the genocide denier should not be justification of trivialization of genocide, just raising the issue of freedom of speech. Countries can still act individually, but I think collectively, as part of international community, all of us, all of them, they were there when the genocide happened. They have contributed to UN tribunal, to UN International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. So now it's not the job which is already completely done. They have also to continue contribution, to continue to cooperate, and also genocide denier. So that's why I think that all countries should do more to fight genocide impunity and genocide denier by adopting those laws, but also by cooperating with Rwanda to bring to justice those who are also prosecuted. My colleague Freddy talked about education. I think so the education is still needed, and it's something that will continue. Not the laws that prohibit genocide denial and the establishment of Remembrance Day, they will not be sufficient to fight genocide denial. I think the education is the key, mostly for the new generation. Those who commit genocide, they will be there always. They will be defend themselves that it was not. But now I think the focus needs to be on education, mostly on new generation. We are facing, we know that we have like the descendant of perpetrators who are stepping in now on the next step of denial, what the fathers and the mothers did, mostly in Europe, you know, like about Jambo iceberg in Belgium. We can see that the danger of having the new generation stepping in the same orientation as their fathers. So the education is very key, and the communication, such kind of conferences can also contribute to the prevention and trying to stop this genocide denial, which is taking another level. Owners of social media platforms also should be urged to control seriously their business. Yes, there is a lot of, it's business, but mostly we can see it during this commemoration period, how social medias are really playing a big role, vehiculating this, such kind of messages of genocide denial. Maybe to just stop there, fighting genocide and its denial must be moved from the slogan and laws and wishes and become really a day-to-day reality. Thank you. Maybe I will just complete with the questions that will be raised. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madame Providence. That has been very insightful and very eye-opening. I was actually part of some discussions earlier this week on a similar topic, like I said earlier on, to commemorate the 27th year of the genocide against the Tutsi, from 1994. There have been a series of discussions. This is not the only one. There are many happening across different parts of the country and different parts of the world as well, similar to what we're doing. And one of the, in terms of prosecution of genocide fugitives in the pursuit of justice, some of the statistics given to us by, your colleague institution, the Prosecutor General's office in Rwanda, was out of the 1,100 fugitives in Africa. I would like to just touch on the continent. 900 are from the continent. So that is even just really alarming. Not only internationally out of Africa, but the majority of these fugitives are by the country. Justice is in the Brammertz leads. So thank you very much to all our panelists. Very insightful presentations, very sobering as well. Genocide denial is at an all-time high. We have younger generations perpetuating the same cycle of their predecessors, of their elders, of their parents. So this is not the time to, let things slide. If anything, the fight combating genocide denial needs to be really collectively put forward, working together in tandem with different partners, friends, institutions, and the like. I would like us to now move to the third segment of this virtual conference. And the third segment of this virtual conference is going to be a Q&A session, a sort of open floor with all the participants that we have here. We have a huge screen, a sort of command room where we are in Kigali, and we can see everything that's on our screens. We can see all the participants. So what I'd like to ask the participants to do is to just raise your hands. We have a screen in front of us. We can see if you raise your hand to ask your question. But before doing so, please introduce yourself, the country you're from, or the institution you're also representing. So if we could just have our technical team, just make sure that we're all okay, we're good to go. This is now the time for you participants who've been listening to the subject matter experts, as well as remarks from Honorable Ambassador Nduhungirehe and Mr. Brammertz. Please feel free to share and weigh in with comments or questions. So just a few minutes, a minute or two as we just give way for participants. Just raise your hand and we will be able to see. So we can see most participants at different embassies. We also have names of people. So, well, in the interest of waiting for them to come, I have a couple of questions that I would like to ask to the panelists as we, maybe get ready for participants to get their questions in order. But I'd just like to reiterate, please raise your hand using the the button on your WebEx portal. I think everyone is here using the WebEx link, and then we can fill in your questions. So I would like to just go back to the panelists and what they said. I would like to just I have a question, and this is to do with prosecution, so it would go to you, to Providence. You mentioned some of the challenges, and what I picked up on was to do with extraditing vis-a-vis prosecuting. So why is there still a sort of pushback for countries who are not willing to extradite, neither do they have the capacity or claim they don't have the capacity to prosecute? And this question, I would like to address it not only to you, Madame Providence, but also maybe to Mr. Brammertz, who is also here on behalf of the International Residual Mechanism for Criminal Tribunals. What, in layman's terms, to our viewers on YouTube, our viewers on Facebook, if there are genocide fugitives in this country, why is there pushback, or why is there strong resistance to extradite if they say that they're unable to prosecute? So I would like to start, if you would answer it first, Madame Providence, and Mr. Brammertz, I would like to also hear from you on this. Over to you.
Thank you, Diana. First of all, with this experience, since we started to request extraditions and send those indictments that I said, most of the countries, it's just a lack of political will. That's what I can say. If there is a political will, those countries that have show that they have that will, they accepted to extradite them, even if when we didn't have extradition treaties with them. Most, as you said, we have many cases in Africa. There are many countries that also bring on the table that we don't have extradition treaties with them. Though, even when we send those proposals of treaties, they are just reluctant to sign them. So it's just a matter of lack of political will. But we are not just closing hand, we continue pushing and pushing. So also there is an issue of the suspect themselves, when they know that maybe we have targeted that country, they are on their territory, they also try to move around. Those who are in Europe, it's easier to leave from Belgium to go to Netherlands within 2 hours and move around. Those in Africa, it's easier also to, mostly, for example, in southern part of Africa, we can just target that you have information that someone is in South Africa, and within the same day, you may find he just moved from South Africa, he's in Mozambique and Zimbabwe. But our institutions, they are working together, the National Prosecution Office, and also there are some cases that at the same time, I think Mr. Brammertz will talk about it with regard to the mechanism. But that's mostly that issue, lack of political will. Some countries that consider that it's not their issue. But also we have to be positive on those that took initiative and accepted our request and send them to Rwanda. As I said, we have 23 cases that we have from outside, but also there are 23 cases that have been tried in those countries, like in Belgium, 9 cases already. In France, we have 3 cases, but still it's like 3 cases out of 43 requests that are there. So that's why we insist, though that are symbolic actions that they are taking, but time is going on, time flies, victims, witnesses are just getting old and die. Some of them are dying. Even those perpetrators, some of them are dying without responding to their actions. So that's why the easiest way or the best way to address the issue is just to extradite those people and be judged in Rwanda.
Thank you very much, Providence. Over to you if you'd like to also weigh in on this question, Mr. Brammertz.
Yes, sure, with pleasure. I mean, the legal principle is quite clear. It's or you prosecute or you extradite. This is a choice countries have. But what we see in reality is that this is not not the case. The example of my own country was mentioned, Belgium, where we had a number of cases prosecuted successfully in Belgium, but we know that this is not happening in many countries. There are several reasons I think this problem is still a reality. One of the more historical problems, if I may say, was that the years after the genocide, the late 90s, and perhaps even a little bit later, one of the arguments that many countries put forward was to say, well, after the genocide, the judicial system in Rwanda is not independent and impartial enough to deal with those cases. This was an argument which was very much used by courts around the world, which is absolutely not valid anymore for many years. Latest after the UN court decided about the transfer of a number of cases to Rwanda, and where the judges very clearly established that the legal and defense, etc., other conditions are absolutely met to have cases transferred. And myself, I'm in my Security Council briefings, but also in all my bilateral meetings with UN member states, always advocate for this principle: or you prosecute, which is fine, or you extradite. Now, it was mentioned before, and the unfortunate reality is that there are still problems which are much larger than the non-arrest. I mentioned earlier that we mentioned regularly that countries are not helpful even to determine and to find individuals indicted by the United Nations court. I've mentioned it a number of times, and one of the reasons being that the majority of fugitives, certainly a lot of them on the African continent, have false documents, who have been obtained via corruption, who have been protected for many, many years because they got political protection. And this is one of the challenges we have today, to really convince countries to be more forthcoming in terms of cooperation in relation to arresting Romanian fugitives, extraditing them or transferring them to the United Nations Tribunal, but of course also to the national authorities in Kigali. I mean, we speak about 6 remaining persons we are looking for, and as it was mentioned several times, there are more than 1,000 my friend and colleague Prosecutor General in Kigali is looking for. So there are a number of reasons which today really shouldn't be any excuse for those extraditions. The international community should really be more engaged in.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brammertz. We have a question coming in from Felix Ndahinda. Felix Ndahinda has raised his hand. If he can raise his question, or if we can have it shared with us with our technical team. Felix?
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm putting on just the video for the question. Yeah, Felix Ndahinda, a researcher based in the Netherlands, and I have a question, hopefully that I will hope to hear from Roland and probably Prosecutor Serge and Ambassador Nduhungirehe. And mine is really a question around the spaces of fighting genocide denial and the intersection between politics and the laws. I have followed with great interest the various presentations. Thank you very much for your insights, and for thank you, Roland, for the very well organized ideas around the vulnerability of audiences today around genocide. Now, my question is really around the spaces of fighting genocide denial. Allow me a little bit to elaborate. If you look at what Roland said, mostly he was insisting on the vulnerability of history of genocide itself, but also of the vulnerability of audiences, the fact that a number of audiences can be manipulated into believing things that are untrue. Now, my question is more around people actually who manipulate the truth that they know in order to further certain given narratives. And that's where I talk about the intersection between politics and law. Now, I'm saying this because I read the very newly released Declare report. That is an amazing document that needs really to be exploited to the maximum, because it shows us really how political powers in France, Mitterrand's France, for example, was very instrumental in creating narratives of either the legitimization of the RPF, the envahisseur Ugando Tutsi, or later the legitimization of the suffering of the Tutsi victims. Now, when, of course, always associated with the RPF and in many ways. Now, when you look at that, it's clear that you had many contradictions even within the intelligence France had. There were very many people who knew what the reality was in terms of the identity of the RPF, but also in terms of the identity of people who are being targeted during the genocide. But still, France was very much good at creating certain given narratives that were in later years recuperated by quite a number of actors. Before we talk a lot about Judy Rivers today, but we tend then to forget about Pierre Peyon quite a number of years earlier. I mean, in fact, Judy Rivers is a lot of a recycling of a lot of claims made by Pierre Peyon in his Noir Fureur Blanc-Menteur. And we talk about the BBC documentary and so on. So, for instance, today, there was this conference taking place soon with Judy Rivers in Cambridge. And I would claim that, for instance, that the mere fact that the UK today is engaged in epistemic debates about whether to talk about the genocide against the Tutsi or simply Rwandan genocide and so on, such narratives, matters a lot in making a conference like that in Cambridge possible. I'm not necessarily saying there is a very direct link, but it's a facilitating factor, I may argue. Having said that, and I'm not making a presentation here, my question then would be, with the hindsight, with the declared reports and so on, how can we best effectively fight genocide ideology in terms of laws, in terms of prosecutions, international or within Rwanda, but also in terms of politics? That's why I identified my potential respondents. Because these narratives carried through political spaces, through political agendas, do matter in today's modern age of social media and so on, in fueling certain given editorial readings of history, of reality, of facts. Back to you. Thank you for bearing with me with this long question.
Thank you very much, Felix. I think everyone got the gist of his question. Would you like to start, Providence, or would I actually hand over to Honorable Ambassador or Dr. Roland? Who would like to start in addressing Mr. Felix Hinde's question? Yes, Dr. Roland, over to you.
Thank you. Felix, I think it's a very good question. What I think is needed is that you need to make, because we all talk about genocide denial all the time now, but it remains a very abstract notion. I think in order to, let's say, make audiences more critically aware, you need to make it very tangible. That, I think, is key, because then you create understanding and you can make the problem more tangible in various ways. For instance, Freddy talked about the role of victim statements in the context of commemoration, or how they are used also in genocide museums. I think it would be very insightful to also have documented what denial does to victims. How does it affect them? I think for many audiences, this remains rather unclear. Also, if you have discussions about genocide denial legislation, criminalization of it, deniers always say these laws are used to cover up the truth. I think what needs to happen is outreach. You need to extract cases that have been tried in Rwanda, in France, in Belgium, and you need to translate to the general public what was at stake in these trials and why people were held accountable. What exactly did they do and why was that problematic? That I think is key. If we only talk about genocide denial in very abstract terms, I think the understanding that is needed to actually be critically aware of it, to act against it, I think it will not materialize. But as I also said, I think making things very tangible is also a challenge. That I think is also a challenge that the ICTR had in terms of outreach, that I have as a researcher when I study that complex phenomenon. How do you translate this in a comprehensive way, in a tangible way to audiences? That I think is key, making things tangible.
Roland, would any of the speaker panelists like to weigh in on what the question was from Mr. Felix?
I'm happy to come in if...
Yes, sure.
If you want me.
Sure.
You know, as we, probably everyone, I would imagine, listening to us, don't need to be convinced about the difficulties and the problem which is coming with genocide denial. As UN prosecutor, of course, I'm working with the genocide against the Tutsi, but of course I have responsibility also for the crimes committed in the former Yugoslavia. And so I can see on a daily basis how much everything which has already been discussed today from a scientific perspective is happening exactly in the same way in the Balkans, where you know, the political entity, Republika Srpska, where the Srebrenica genocide was committed, where the political leadership is saying, we take the reference to the genocide out of our school books because it never happened, where a number of public buildings were called after convicted genocidaires in The Hague. And if I would say what is my biggest frustration of being, after having been the chief prosecutor of the Yugoslav Tribunal for more than 10 years, is that we haven't managed, despite the fact that we have showed videos where prisoners were executed, we have showed all the videos and pictures about all the crimes committed, there is still an important part of the political leadership which is absolutely de facto, as we discussed today, continuing the genocide by denying the victims the right to be seen as victims of genocide. So it is indeed a very large problem, and we are trying to do a lot of outreach. I'm trying to give a lot of conferences, but we have to accept that it is a political instrument which is used by many. We have seen that individuals are trying to say it is not me who is prosecuted by those international tribunals. I'm representing here my people. So perpetrators who are prosecuted for their individual criminal responsibility, and we have taken advantage of the trust put in them, well, they are trying to deviate from their personal responsibility by saying, I've done it to represent my people. And as long as we are not more successful in breaking this bridge between the physical perpetrator and those who are still today the followers, I think we have an important problem.
Very much, Mr. Brammertz. I would like to, yes, Honorable Ambassador, over to you.
Thank you very much, and I thank Felix Ndahinda for his important question. And he's right. You know, fighting genocide denies first and foremost an issue of political will of governments, even without laws. Because you remember, as he recalled, that this theory of double genocide was being spread by the Mitterrand government as the genocide against the Tutsi was being committed. Mitterrand himself was talking about genocides in plural to make confusion, people be confused about what happened in Rwanda, and then this continued afterwards. And we know that in our law on genocide denial and minimization are connected to the crime of genocide ideology. We know that genocide denial is part of the crime of genocide itself, is the last stage of the crime of genocide. But it also, we can argue that it can be the first stage of another genocide if people are spreading that kind of ideology. And we have heard in the past years that we have online radios in Rwanda who are spreading genocide ideology openly from mainly from the US. And we have raised this issue, and it's still it is not addressed completely, because we have people on a daily basis talking about extermination, using codes like we need negotiations, otherwise the Kagame people will be exterminated until the village level. So we have raised this issue, but nothing is being done. We know that there is a sacrosanct First Amendment in the US, but there are limits to what people can say. So the main issue is political will. Of course, a law can help. A law criminalizing genocide denial can help, but the most important is having the will of governments to deal with issue. Providence Umurungi was reminding the issue we have with governments that do not want to either prosecute or extradite. This is still an issue now, 27 years after the genocide. It's an issue that we need to deal with. So we are still working with those governments to ensure that something is done, because as it was recalled, time flies. We are now in 2021. Victims, witnesses, even perpetrators are getting old. Some stories or how things happened it's not fresh in the minds of people. People are dying, and justice is not being done. So it's important to ensure that we have political will of those governments to help us fighting against genocide and fighting against genocide denial. Thank you.
Well, Ambassador, you're absolutely right. I think one of the tools or one of the mechanisms used, especially so even fugitives escaping justice, is to really just prolong the process. It's 27 years later, but for many survivors of the genocide, justice is still something that, is not something that some may not even see in their lifetime, based on the long process of this pursuit of justice. I would like to ask if there are any more questions from our participants. Any more hands raised? Okay. Yeah, I think we have a chat. If we could have the chat open. There's a chat going on. I think some people put their questions in chat. But please, if you could raise your hand and click on your video, or at least your audio, that would be great, so we can have a more interactive session. We'll come back to the participants, but I just now want to move to the next section of the program. And this next section of the program, as I said earlier on, is to do with the participants, with the panelists. But just very quickly, yes, I'm told we have a question coming in on the chat section. And this question is from Hilda Kamadi. Her question is, apologies, we hadn't seen this. Hilda's question is, what concrete action has been implemented by the relevant authorities of the African Union to bring justice the remaining perpetrators of the genocide on the African continent? Very good question, Hilda. I know this is something I mentioned to you, Providence, saying that the majority of the 1,100 outstanding cases, 900 of them are on the African continent. So her question is based on how is the AU, how is the African Union also being engaged with to make justice happen? Who would like to take that question? Thank you. I'll hand it over to Providence.
Thank you, Moderator. Well, the Peace and Security Council, as it has been raised by the Excellence Ambassador when he was in his opening remarks, made a communique in 2017 calling up upon all countries, state members of AU to recognize that in 1994 the genocide committed against Tutsi, but also to cooperate in cooperation and bringing to justice the perpetrators who might be on their territories. But also they observe also on the Remembrance Day on 7th April. They have also that the day of reflection on genocide committed against Tutsi. But regarding the what concrete actions that the AU as a body of all states make a wish, if I can say, but the implementation and what the actions have to be taken by state members themselves. So they have their laws, they have their domestic judicial systems. That way they have to cooperate with Rwanda. What I can say is that since 2017, we have been able to sign extradition treaties with 7 countries in Africa. And some, but though we signed with them, we have not yet received suspects that are on their countries. But our offices, prosecution office is collaborating with their respective offices. I think it's only Malawi that we received someone from there into 2018 or 2019. But the rest, the negotiation, the cooperation, as I said, it does becomes like bilateral negotiations between state members, but not at the level of AU as a body that can impose or, you know, they just they made a communique, they request the cooperation, but the rest of implementation is just between the states that can take measures.
Thank you very much, Providence. I think that's it in terms of the chat, in terms of also the questions from participants. I have one question just before we go to the next section of this program, which is really to hear from all speakers and panelists, you know, final exchange or closing remarks, that sort of thing. My question also is to really all the panelists and speakers. Is to do with the what we've been seeing. You know, last year there was the, you know, concerted effort, and we saw the capture of Felicia Kabuga. We saw the Declared Commission report that was released this year. Just today, or was it yesterday or last night, we saw, you know, being brought to Rwanda, Munyenyezi, who was a big played a big role as a genocidaire in the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. These sort of events have been happening quite quickly. Usually when there's pursuing the, you know, justice for genocide victims and survivors, it really takes, I mean, it's still almost 3 decades later. But in the last 2-3 years, there seems to be a concerted effort to bring these fugitives to book. And I just want to ask a general question in terms of optimism. Is this something, is this a trend we can expect? And what are some of behind the scenes mechanisms, or what are some of the behind the scenes actions that have seen at least these 3 key things happening? The Declared Commission report, you know, the capture of Felicia Kabuga, and just recently, you know, being brought to Rwanda to face justice, the lady Munyenyezi. So, question, just to rephrase it properly, is there a sense of optimism? Can we expect more in, you know, seeing this continued trend? And what are some of the behind the scenes sort of background activities or collective efforts that have led to these activities that we're seeing in just the last 2-3 years? I don't know who'd like to take this question. It's quite broad. I don't know who'd like to start on answering this question. Ambassador?
Yes, I can start.
Okay.
It's true that for the past years, we have seen a number of new developments regarding accountability for genocide. You mentioned the arrest of Felicia Kabuga, the deportation of Beatrice Munyenyezi, the declared report We have been, so for the past 27 years, there have been ups and downs. We can put it that way, depending on countries. For example, in the country where I am, in the Netherlands, there's something that was done. There are trials that were held here in the Netherlands. There were extradition that took place, and there are arrests that were conducted. So there's something moving here in the Netherlands when they were still working with the Dutch government to do more, because we still have genocide suspects in this country. There was the example of countries that were given that have done, I would say, nothing for the past 27 years. No prosecution, no extradition. There are others that that have tried, but not enough in my sense. Because when we give the example of France, we have a number of arrest warrant, but only, I think, 3 cases that were tried. So things are still slow. So what we would expect now, with I would say the momentum with the declared report, is to see things moving more in France, because this is where we have many genocide suspects since 1994. We hope that something will be done to speed up the judicial process, because we have recalled, time flies, and it's important to give justice to the victims. We have appreciated the arrest of Félicien Kabuga, which is important because of his role in the genocide, and we believe that it's important to hold the trial as soon as possible because of his age, of his physical health, to ensure that there is justice for the victims. So we will work with the concerned government also with the mechanism, which is doing a good job in really continuing the work of the ICTR. One of the development you didn't mention is that now we don't have automatic early release as it was the case in the past under Judge Theodore Meron. You have heard that Theoneste Bagosora, who is one of the masterminds of the genocide, was denied early release because of he's yet to accept any responsibility, to have any sort of repentance. And we hope that this trend will continue, because that was not the case in the past. We have many genocide perpetrators who were released before time, and then also those who had seen their sentence reduced, or who are even acquitted by the appeals chamber. So we hope that now we will see things in a more in a proper way, which is important for the victims. So I would not say that it's a new wave of optimism, but we will be vigilant with all countries and ensure that we expedite all the processes to ensure that the justice is done for the victim. Thank you.
Very much, Honorable Ambassador. Yes, over to you, Mr. Brammertz.
Thank you. Yeah, your question should be optimistic, and of course I share what the ambassador just explained. But I think we have to be optimistic, because this is what is expected from victims. They want us to continue pushing very hard, and so we have to believe that we can be successful. Now, the reality is that unfortunately there is very often more words than action. And we have seen it with our fugitives. We located, we think, 3 fugitives, one of them being Kabuga in France, and the arrest took place For two others, we identified the countries where they were hiding in Germany, on the African continent, and where countries have not provided the cooperation which is necessary. And those are United Nations member states who have an obligation to cooperate with the UN Tribunal. So if countries are even not cooperating with the United Nations Tribunal, where they have a legal obligation to cooperate, I can easily imagine that if it's at a bilateral level, it's even more complicated. So more action is definitely needed, but we continue pushing for it.
Mr. Brammertz. So now I would like us to just go to the final part of this conversation. We're really good with time, I'm happy to see, which is basically, you know, just to hear closing remarks from all the speakers, all the panelists, so to speak. Freddy, I'm going to start with you. Freddy has been awfully quiet, so in getting us all in winding up this section of the program, just, you know, closing remarks between all the speakers and panelists, I will hand over to Freddy. Over to you, Freddy.
Well, thank you very much, Moderator. I think this conference has been very much inspiring, actually, is even understanding how different topics and can actually work in synergy to bring these perpetrators of genocide to justice, but also to fight against deniers of genocide in this time. So I'm so inspired by this conference, and I think this kind of conferences and reflections should be continuing this way. And thank you very much. I had a question that I was about to ask, but one part was answered by Providence. It was related mostly on actually the resolution have been voted into UN about the recognition of genocide against Tutsi, but also the 7th of April becoming the day of reflection of genocide against Tutsi. My question was about what next on the side of UN to support Rwanda's effort to convince the countries to establish the laws that really punish the genocide ideology. Of course, we heard about the efforts about actually different effort that Rwanda government is making to get countries buying in this idea to put the laws to extradite the suspect of genocide, but also put the laws that may help to try them in the countries. But is it the same? Well, I know we're making more effort with the genocide denier as well to put those laws in place. Is UN really? Is any pressure we can put to UN to convince the countries to help Rwanda's effort to get these countries actually put those laws in place?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Freddy. And those are challenging questions, and more demand for accountability, transparency, and most importantly, international cooperation. I really hope this is something that, like Honorable Ambassador said, this is momentum that we need really now more than ever moving forward. I'd like to also now just also give the floor to the embassy in Cameroon, just also to share remarks and also just commentary on the insights that have been given by all the panelists and speakers.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody. My name is Mrs. Ligomo Omadlen. I'm the Cameroon ambassador to the Netherlands. I just would like to say a word of appreciation about this virtual conference, talking about such an important topic. And just to say that Cameroon government is very supportive of all the efforts of the Rwandese government. In the past, we used to have a lot of Rwandese citizens in Cameroon as refugees and so on. And I think Cameroon participated a lot in helping for the justice to be implemented. So it's just to say that we are together, that we hope that this type of history, this type of horror does not happen anymore all over the world. This is our prayers as Africans. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. And thank you for also just sitting in and being part of this virtual conference. Many thanks, many thanks. I'd like to hand over closing remarks or final exchange to Dr. Moerland. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. I had a question for Freddy. I actually have two questions. They were triggered by his presentation. At one point, you highlighted the role of education and how important it is. But you also say you need to be careful on how you develop these educative tools, because they can also be used by or abused by others or the opposite side. So I was wondering, like, can you clarify this in more detail? What do you mean with that? Because I think that's very intriguing. And the second aspect is that you say, okay, we need to think about what we need in terms of education in our country, in Rwanda. When I started doing my research on genocide denial, I started in Rwanda with fieldwork, but I ended up back in Europe because I found out that the problem here is dire. So the question, I think, is not only what type of education do we need in Rwanda. I think the question is also what type of education do we need in other countries on this topic around the globe. And do you have any ideas with regard to that? Thank you.
Very good question. Of course, in my presentation, I mentioned that we need to be careful to about the education that our children are given. What I refer to this one is that most of people, the masterminders of genocide, they're all educated. Not necessarily, actually, it does mean that the sciences, the numeracy and the literacy doesn't really contribute a lot to the ideas of peace and ideas of actually coexistence, and that may lead to prevent deniers and genocide. So what I was trying to emphasize, on top of those education that are provided in education systems in different parts of the world, that's really really building up intellectuals and clever people, and we need to add the education that really promote the positive values and that people can really understand how to live together, how to build the empathy and critical thinking, and be responsible for their actions, but at the same time building a world with peace. So this is need to be added into the curriculums to be able to build people and good citizens. That's what I meant. So I think in answering the first question, I also touched on your second question on what type of education needed actually in our education system.
Thank you very much. Dr. Roland, have your questions been answered sufficiently? Okay. I'd like to just request, I don't know if it's the Embassy of Cameroon in the Netherlands, if you could just please put your microphones on mute. Yeah, there's some sort of feedback that we're getting. If you could just put them on mute. All right, we're still doing the final exchange between panelists. I'd like to hand over to Ms Providence Umurungi. Any last comments you have or questions to your fellow panelists? Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. My general comment has been raised, and it has been also all of us, depending on which angle we deal with this issue in our daily work. It's that we recognize that the genocide denial is a challenge, but it's something that requires efforts from everyone, collectively and individually. We can
you increase the sound?
Hello? Can you hear me now? Yeah, I was saying that the genocide denial is a challenge that we continue to face, and it's something that calls the effort for everyone, individually and collectively. Though there are some main success that we have registered in judging and prosecuting genocide perpetrators, but the deniers still have platforms, and it's a huge component that we have to fight with our efforts. There was one idea that was raised by Mr. Roland about it's just now that, and it's true, I do agree with him, that's now that the issue of fighting genocide is more vulnerable than the genocide itself. Genocide denial is it's something that requires a lot of effort. I had a need, even if I'm a lawyer, I would think I have an idea when he gave the example of BBC and not the media house, publishing houses that publish Judy River and others, and we have Pierre Payan, we have the last one, Mr. Wrong, Mrs. Wrong. How can we now, how a country, or I don't know if it will be a country or individuals or association, also can hold accountable those media house and the public house, publishing house, though there is no way evidence that they share the idea of denying the genocide, but they are facilitating it. They are enabling it by giving that platform to those authors.
How can we how can we fight against those big media houses and publishing house? That's where I need maybe an idea how we can also go on that sense. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You know, this virtual conference is raising more questions than it is answering, you know, questions, which is fair enough. It's a lot of food for thought. The way forward is really, it's tough, and we need to be as consistent as possible, collectively and concertedly fighting genocide denial. Thank you very much, Providence. I would like to hand over now to the remaining two speakers and panelists, final exchange or final remarks, and I'll start with you, Mr. Brammertz. You're on mute.
I noticed.
Okay.
But it was done. Well, what we have discussed several times today is that, in fact, genocide denial today is even worse than 10 years ago. And I mentioned other parts of the world where we see exactly the same. It means very clearly that those who are active on genocide denial have a strategy, have an objective, and they are getting still closer to their objective. And those who are objecting it, well, we all have many other things to do. So my conclusion would be that to say that, well, there have been a number of wake-up calls in relation to genocide denial over the last few years, and this conference is another wake-up call. We need strategies. We need an international agenda. We need political will. We need support in order to face this important challenge. But I think together, it is absolutely possible to be more successful in the future by making sure that there are even more prosecution, more successful cases in court to, again, put in the public domain the truth about the genocide, and making sure that in as many countries as possible, genocide denial is a criminal offense. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brammertz. Dr. Roland, when I asked you to comment, you asked questions, but I want to check in. Are there any closing remarks you have, or was that it from you?
No, what I think is important to take into account is that if you see that the scope of actors involved in this process of denial is widening, and that also actors, it was also just mentioned, that also actors who do not share maybe the ideology of the perpetrators, maybe also do not aim to achieve the same goals, then I think you need to also change and adopt your strategy to these new types of actors that get involved. And that, I think, is an important thing, because there we also somehow need to reinvent ourselves. Yeah, there, I think if we were dealing with hardcore perpetrators, you might be able to hold them criminally accountable. But if you have actors that through ignorance somehow end up facilitating this process, then I think you need other measures to address these actors and somehow make them less ignorant or more critically aware. But I think it's also a more general discussion. I mean, we live in a time where you look at, let's say, the websites of certain publishing houses, you find books that deny the genocide, you find books that acknowledge the genocide, and they live happily together in the Africa division of that particular publishing house. I think it shows the problem with our postmodern times, where truth is relative and there is always another side to the story. So I think, in addition to maybe raising critical awareness among certain particular audiences, I think we should also have a broader discussion in our societies. Because I already said it with regard to that truth regarding genocides is vulnerable because denial is intrinsic to the crime. But I think this vulnerability is exacerbated by this very relativist attitude that we nowadays have in our society. Moreover, what I also think is interesting or is relevant, and also Mr. Freddy raised this issue, that also we need to, let's say, strengthen our research efforts across the globe. Build relationship between local researchers in Rwanda, but also researchers located in other countries. We need to work together. I think that can be done more efficiently. The same with education. Bring more comparative aspects in genocide education. So I think there are many things that we can do on a broader level, but also in very practical ways. Yeah. Thank you.
Very much, Dr. Moerland. Over to you, Honorable Ambassador, for your closing remarks or final exchange regarding the insights that have been shared in this virtual conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diana. Thank you, first of all, for ably moderating this panel discussion on how to end genocide denial. And although you said rightly that the conference poses more questions than it provides answers, it's because maybe of the magnitude of the problem we still have 27 years after the genocide perpetrated against the Tutsi. You know, we are here talking about a genocide. A genocide is an important crime. It's the most important crime in any criminal book. So for that, there were difficulties, of course, in the years after the genocide. But now we have the international jurisprudence through the ICTR and also decisions that were taken by international organizations like the UN, be it the General Assembly or the Security Council, on the genocide perpetrated against the Tutsi. So there is no more debate or discussions on what happened in Rwanda in 1994. It was settled by international jurisdictions, political and judicial. Now we need to go to the phase of implementation and showing political way, because the resolutions and decisions I was mentioning regarding genocide were touching on this issue of genocide denial, but also on the issue of need for accountability, to calling on all member states of the UN to prosecute perpetrators of the genocide. I think we need really to continue working towards that. Actually, I think there are three things that are important as far as the responsibility of states is concerned. First, of course, is the need for accountability. It's really important that, since we are talking about the most serious crime on earth, that we need really to do our part. If we have, if we know, because all countries know that there are people that are being that are under international arrest warrant, that have committed, that are accused of committing the most serious crime that can exist on earth. So this issue of accountability or acting on arrest warrant that were sent, it's really critical because we are now 27 years after the genocide. I think we need really to ensure that this thing is done before it's too late for some of the people concerned. And then two, education. Education is also critical, because we have in our schools, in many countries, the lesson of history, for example. But the lesson of history, be it in high school or even university, must include the most serious or important events that happen in the course of our history. And the genocide is, of course, one of them. There are not genocides every day. There are only few genocides that were established by international jurisdiction or recognized by international organizations. So it's important to ensure that the history of the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda is taught in schools in all countries, actually, because we are talking about the genocide. And I'm telling this because I think when I was ambassador in Belgium a few years ago, there was a team of a delegation of GIRG from Kigali that was coming from France, and they were surprised to see that many young people from high school in France have never heard about a genocide in Rwanda. Never. So I think it's important to really to work on this issue, because it's even in the resolutions of the UN that countries need to commit to have educational programs on the genocide in order to prevent future genocide. And then the third issue, which is also important and which is also linked to the two other issues, it's the need to fight genocide denial, because it's still going on in many countries and it's even increasing. It is now, as I said in my statement, it's no more limited to cycles of genocide fugitives and their communities. It is also I would say, in an intellectual community, in experts, journalists, and others who are questioning or revising our history. So this can be done, of course, through legislation, but it must be done first and through political will, because without political will, nothing can be done. I think those three things are important. We'll going to continue working with our sister countries to ensure that really we don't meet here in 5 years or 10 years in another conference without any new development on this issue. And I wanted to, of course, to thank the three panelists and the speaker for their insightful presentations on this issue. It was really important to have this debate, and we have learned a lot. And then we hope that participants have also learned a lot. We have seen that there were not many questions. Maybe it's because they were all clear in their presentations. And I thank the participants, the embassies and ambassadors that are here present, and others who attended. We hope to meet in the near future to further discuss on this topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Ambassador. You have, more or less summarized in your closing remarks the last part of what you're just saying, the key issues that are needed in the challenge, when it comes to genocide ideology and genocide denial. We talked about the fact that, there's much more proliferation of genocide denial across the globe more now than ever. Of course, with the advent of social media, this is not something you can regulate or control. You have, younger generations that taking on the mantle of perpetuating genocide ideology based on their elders. We have also issues of, like you mentioned, Providence, publishing houses and media houses, unwittingly or not, pushing forward this narrative. And now more than ever, really, genocide denial is at an all-time high. It's a collective and concerted effort in dealing with this issue. Just 1 second. Yes? Yeah. Okay. I really, as a moderator, like sticking to the script in the interest of time, but this is also a very important discussion. And there's just one question here that I will give to Freddy to read. It is to Freddy and to Providence. If you could read it out, Freddy, and also just answer it. And apologies, I know I was closing, but I think it's important to give everyone, a chance to share, their questions. Freddy, if you could read out that question, because it is addressed to you and Providence. Thank you.
Ibihugu byashyizeho amategeko ahana abahakana n'abapfobya jenoside yakorewe abatutsi mu Rwanda b'igihumbi kimwe magana cyenda mirongo icyenda na kane. Ibindi bihugu bikaba bitararishyiraho. Ibyo bigatuma abo bayihakana babarizwa mu bihugu bidahana icyo cyaha bakomeza kuyihakana no kuyipfobya, kuko ndetse bashyizeho mo imbaraga nyinshi. Ese byashoboka ko hasabwa itegeko mpuzamahanga rihana abayihakana n'abayipfobya ku buryo aho baba bari hose bashobora gufata bagashyikirizwa ubutabera? Ubwo yitwa Anita Mahoro in Netherlands. To Freddy and Providence. Yeah.
Yeah, do you want to answer?
I think it's more long.
Well, maybe if I can translate first for those who don't speak Rwanda. The person is asking that there are some countries that have enabled the laws that punish genocide denial, but there are others that don't have such kind of laws, and which makes it easier for deniers to be in those countries. And so there can be there a law, international law, that requests states parties to have such kind of laws and their domestic laws to punish and punish and prosecute the genocide deniers, if I can, I think. Well, first of all, genocide deniers are not only in those countries that don't have laws, even in those that have laws that punish the genocide denier. Like, as I said, it's only Rwanda which have the law, and also France and Belgium, which revise the existing laws to include the punishment, the prosecution of those who deny the genocide that have been recognized by national and international court. But still, we can say that there are no genocide deniers in Belgium or in France. Genocide deniers are everywhere, and they are using these platforms, as you said, the radios and social media, so you can see them. So they are everywhere. So the issue, in my point of view, yes, we are calling upon countries to have such kind of laws, but those laws themselves don't resolve the problem of genocide denial. Yes, if we have some cases in the court in those countries, we send a message, but as the ambassador said, the most important thing is that in those countries, more the collective efforts and the responsibility of states having that political will to know that the genocide denier is linked to the crime of genocide itself. So even the Holocaust that have took place almost 75 years ago, there is no international law that punish Holocaust denier as such. Individual states took measures to balance, to put in place laws that punish Holocaust denial, and why they still respect their fundamental rights of freedom of speech. So what we think is that by extension, those countries, even others, can adopt such kind of attitude, and they have some legislation without necessarily having, because UN, international community is every country, so there is no way UN can tell a country put in place a law, a specific law punishing genocide against the Tutsi or what. But it's just, as I said, in each country, each state is independent, and but as there have been those efforts that we observe with regard to Holocaust, I think the same efforts can be done also by extension to the genocide against Tutsi. That's my take. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Providence. And now, as I was saying, we've come to the end of this very important virtual conference. Thank you very much to everyone who's been here. Honorable Ambassador, Mr. Brammertz, Dr. Moerland, thank you very much for your insightful and very important contributions to Providence Umurungi and Mr. Freddy Mutanguha. Thank you. Thank you very much. This conversation has been online. It has been online live on the Embassy of the Republic of Rwanda's pages on Facebook and I believe YouTube, but we are happy to just share them with all the panelists and speakers. Or also everyone who's been tuning in, and also the participants who've been sharing their insights, Mr. Felix, and as well as some of the insights we've been given. And also many thanks to the Embassy of Cameroon in the Kingdom of the Netherlands. And last but not least, thank you very much to the Embassy of Rwanda, based in the to the Kingdom of the Netherlands, for organizing this very important event 27 years after the genocide against the Tutsi. How can we end genocide denial? I think we have a long way to go. It's a matter of collective and concerted efforts with institutions, with countries, and so forth and so on. So with that said, I think I would like to officially, let's close and bring to an end this very interesting conversation. Thank you once again, and have a good rest of your weekend. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.